instruments, and Eddie decides that he's going to go back to shore and that he's going to save everybody. And you remember, how far can you see on the horizon off of our ship? 10 miles. If you're down low, you can only see 3 or 4 miles. So Eddie takes off, and he's never seen again. He ends up losing his life, and they search for him, for days, and they cannot find him. He ends up losing his life. The rest of them end up getting saved because an Hawaiian Airlines jet is flying by, and just by chance, they happen to see them, and they're all rescued except for Eddie Aikau. And there he is. And now there's a saying on Hawaii, every single Hawaiian knows this saying, and it's Eddie would go. And whenever they're faced with something difficult, people will use that term and that phrase, and they'll say, oh, well, Eddie would go, and that's like, get with it, go do it. Anyway, now they're stuck. Hokulea, they bring it back to shore, and Nainoa realizes that if he's going to do this, he's got to somehow convince Mau to come back. Mau, in the meantime, he's in Satawal, living his life, and he is thinking that it's been a couple of years, maybe I do need to go back and do it, unbeknownst to Nainoa. Nainoa talks with his father, and his father convinces him that if you're going to do it, you need to go back, and you need to convince Mau to come back and participate in this. And Nainoa has another idea this time, though. He says, Mau, instead of coming back and doing it, why don't you come back and teach us how to do it? And that fits perfectly with what Mau is thinking, because Mau wants this tradition to carry on. He doesn't want this to get lost. And that's exactly what happens. Mau comes back, and he trains Nainoa, and 2 years later, 1980, they replicate that. 4 years after the very first voyage, they replicate that again, and this time it's Nainoa. As a result of that, the PBS just exploded with growth, and they started bringing kids in. They have 5 voyaging canoes now. One of them, if you're ever back in Kauai, if you get off the ship, you can see the Carnival there kind of over on the left, and you'll see one of their voyaging canoes when it's in. You may have even walked by it and not even known it, but that's one of the 5 voyaging canoes, replicas of the Hokulea, and it sits right there if you're walking into town in Kauai. This resulted in the revival of Polynesian navigation and canoe building in Hawaii. And not only Hawaii, but these other islands as well. Since then, the Hokulea has traveled on all of these journeys. It's been around the world several times. It's come into San Francisco as well, done all of these voyages through here. They've completed a circumnavigation of the globe, which is just hard to believe, but they did do that. And now, this is their new mission. This is a voyage for the oceans and for Earth, and they're going to be traveling all through the Pacific Ocean here for the next 2 or 3 years. I got to see them and meet them when they were up here in Alaska last year. And they'd just gotten off, they'd come down the coast, back to Hawaii, and they're going to continue, and they're visiting schools, they're visiting all of these community centers, and they're sharing the story of Polynesian voyaging. In the meantime, Mau has diabetes, it turns out. And he stays on Hawaii a little bit longer for his dialysis. And he finally realizes that he's toward the end of his life, and he decides that he's going to go back to Satawal. That's where he wants to be. Nainoa decides, how are we going to honor Mau? And he says, what better way than to build a canoe? And that's exactly what they do. They raise money, they're going to build this canoe, and they're going to sail this canoe back to Satawal. It's called the Maisu. In 2007, 45 days, they sail this canoe, accompanied with the Hokulea. They arrive in Satawal. It's a big deal here. Nainoa is now a master navigator, just as Mau is, and they hold this ceremony called a pau. And during that ceremony, this is where these navigators are almost, it's like getting your Eagle Scout badge or something like that, and they are just pronounced master navigators. And that's Mao in that ceremony. And it's this elaborate ceremony. Mao received honorary degrees from the University of Hawaii. He was honored by the Smithsonian Institute and the Bishop Museum in Hawaii for his contributions and literally saving this ancient art of navigating. His life and works were explored in several books, documentary films as well. And I really do think it's one of the great human adventure stories that just doesn't get told enough. These people remembered who they were, and it really launched this whole revival, not just in Hawaii, but all throughout Polynesia. And it's really amazing to me. I often wondered why the Europeans, it took them so long before they went out and explored the Atlantic Ocean. And I was asking that question because it was really Christopher Columbus was the one who sailed across the Atlantic Ocean, because it had always been sitting there. But it wasn't until that 1490s period that the Europeans explored. And what I found is that they weren't comfortable with doing it because they didn't have the instrumentation that they felt they needed to be able to find longitude and mapping out. And also their vessels, they didn't feel like their vessels were at a state where they could do it. Obviously, they had a lot going on in Europe, way more than the Polynesians did. You've got all of the European continent, you've got all that trade going on in the Mediterranean, which they did a lot of. But nobody crossed the Atlantic. And it made me think that, wow, these Hawaiians or these Polynesians started doing that 7,000 years ago. And they were comfortable enough, they felt like they had enough information, enough knowledge to venture out for weeks throughout the Pacific.
The Dark Ages in Europe, everybody thought that if you sailed away,
Yeah.
you disappeared, you'd fall off the earth.
Yeah.
And that fear lasted for hundreds of
Right.
years.
But you know, I did some research on that too, because I thought that's what I had found. But it turns out the Greeks knew long before that the Earth was round, and the educated scientists, people like Da Vinci, people like Michelangelo. These people, the educated Europeans, knew for many centuries.
But they were scared to let their knowledge out because they could be persecuted.
Right. Well, in any case, Mao ended up passing away 2010, and he said, "In teaching navigation to others, I will always be with you." That was his final parting words. And then I got some, if you want to know more about this, these are a few places you can go and learn a little bit more about it. I always dedicated this to Michelle. She was one of our naturalists here who passed away. And this was her absolute favorite show. And that's all I've got for you. And we'll finish up with this song. Thanks, you guys. You're welcome.